The order came down quiet and ugly. More badges than Harlem had ever seen. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He just smiled as the city waited to see who would blink. The order didn't come with sirens. It came folded inside paperwork. Clean, official, heavy with intent. By sunrise, Harlem felt it before it saw it. Squad cars lined the avenues like parked thoughts nobody wanted to finish. Blue coats stood in clusters, hands resting where belts met resolve. No rush, no shouting, just presence. The kind meant to say we're staying a while. This wasn't a raid. Raids were loud. This was occupation. Inside City Hall, men congratulated themselves on language, on phrasing, on how the order never mentioned a name. It didn't need to. Everyone knew who the silence was aimed at. Bumpy Johnson. They didn't say take him. They said restore order. They didn't say Harlem. They said problem area. That's how power hides behind clean words and pressed suits. Down on 135, a shop owner unlocked his gate slower than usual. He watched the street first, counted uniforms, not with fear, with memory. He'd seen moves like this before, the kind that pretended to be about safety while aiming straight at dignity. Across the street, a kid leaned against a lamppost, pretending not to stare. He knew better than to run. Running makes men nervous. Nervous men reach for things. Harlem didn't scatter, it held. That alone unsettled them. Bumpy heard about it without being told. He always did. Someone mentioned extra cars. Someone mentioned City Hall. Someone mentioned how quiet it felt. The words reached him in pieces, but the meaning arrived whole. He sat still when he heard it. Didn't curse. Didn't ask questions. He looked out a window instead. The city thought it was applying pressure. What it didn't understand was pressure only works when the surface underneath it cracks. Harlem wasn't cracking. It was watching. A lieutenant tried to look busy at the corner. He adjusted his cap too often. His men waited for instructions that hadn't been given. They were told to be visible, nothing else. Visibility without direction is just exposure. They expected a reaction, a meeting, a message, a mistake. What they got was nothing, and nothing can be louder than gunfire when you're trying to control a room. Bumpy didn't step outside, didn't send a runner, didn't make a call. That was the first miscalculation. They thought authority meant movement. That power had to show itself to exist. They'd forgotten the oldest rule of the street. The man who moves first is usually the one who's worried. By mid-morning, the police presence doubled. Not because anything happened, but because nothing did. City Hall needed proof that the plan was working, so they escalated without admitting it. More cars, more boots, more eyes that didn't belong. Harlem absorbed it like a long breath. Women crossed the street with their heads high. Men nodded once, then looked past the uniforms like they were furniture. No heckling, no fear, no obedience either. Just memory. They remembered who kept the streets from eating themselves, who settled things quietly, who made sure kids got home without owing anybody later. They remembered Bumpy, and downtown hated that. Inside one cruiser, a young officer asked his partner what they were waiting for. The older one didn't answer right away. He stared ahead, jaw tight. "We're waiting for him to do something," he finally said. The kid frowned. "What if he doesn't?" The older officer exhaled through his nose. "Then we're already losing." Back where Bumpy sat, the room stayed calm. The kind of calm that isn't empty. It's loaded. He adjusted his cuff once. Not nervous, precise. He understood the play. This wasn't about arrest. It was about image, about reminding Harlem who signed the checks and wore the badges. But respect doesn't answer to paperwork. And Bumpy had learned long ago. If you let a man turn your home into a demonstration, you don't get it back without blood. He wasn't interested in blood today, or tomorrow. He was interested in something cleaner. Outside, the city waited. Inside, Harlem listened. And somewhere between the two, the mistake was already locked in. Because when power announces itself too loudly, it invites correction. And Bumpy Johnson had not corrected anyone yet. Harlem didn't flinch. That was the first thing they noticed. The city expected movement, panic, anger, noise. Instead, the streets kept their rhythm. Shoes hit pavement. Doors opened. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Life continued on purpose. That kind of calm isn't natural. It's learned. Men leaned in doorways and said nothing. Women paused mid-conversation when a patrol car rolled by, then resumed like it had never happened. Kids were pulled closer, not rushed away. Nobody gave the uniforms what they wanted. Attention is currency. Harlem didn't spend it. The officers felt it. They stood straighter than they needed to. Hands stayed near batons longer than policy required. They were visible, yes, but visibility without authority is just exposure under a brighter light. Every corner had eyes, not hostile, measuring. Word traveled the old way. No phones buzzing, no messengers running, just glances exchanged, nods. The shared understanding that this wasn't a day for mistakes. Someone asked quietly if Bumpy knew. Someone else answered quieter. If we know, he knows. That settled it. A police captain walked the block like it belonged to him. He made sure to stop where people could see him, to talk where voices might carry. His tone was polite, almost respectful. That's how disrespect arrives when it's wearing a suit. He asked questions. Nobody answered. He smiled at faces that didn't smile back. Harlem wasn't challenging him. It was withholding recognition. That's a different kind of power. Inside a barber shop, the radio played low. Clippers hummed steady. A man in the chair stared at his reflection instead of the mirror behind him. He didn't need to look. He could feel the weight on the street. Feels like a test, someone muttered. No, another voice said. Feels like they already failed. Because fear has tells, so does confidence. The city brought numbers. Harlem brought memory. They remembered nights that could have turned ugly but didn't. Disputes settled before they spread. Lines drawn that were never crossed twice. Not because of threats, but because of understanding. That understanding had a name. Bumpy Johnson hadn't appeared. That was the point. When a man like him stays unseen, it means he's letting the room show its shape before he speaks. It means he's listening, not for noise, but for intention. And the intention was clear now. This wasn't about crime. It was about control. The city wanted Harlem to feel small, to feel managed, to feel watched in its own living room. What it didn't understand was Harlem had already chosen who it listened to. And it wasn't the badges. A young cop shifted his weight near the curb. He glanced at a group of old men playing chess like nothing else existed. No taunts, no stares, just pieces moving with patience. He leaned toward his partner. Why aren't they scared? His partner didn't answer. He was watching the board. Because calm spreads, and dominance doesn't need volume. Somewhere nearby, Bumpy was still quiet, still measuring, letting the city show its hand in full daylight. Harlem wasn't waiting for violence. It was waiting for permission. And when permission comes from the right man, it doesn't sound like an order. It sounds like inevitability. By afternoon, the city grew impatient. Patience is easy when you're certain, harder when silence doesn't crack. More uniforms arrived, not in a rush, but in waves. Each one meant to communicate resolve. Each one quietly asking the same question. Why hasn't he reacted? Because reaction is surrender. Bumpy understood something City Hall never did. Power that needs to be seen is already negotiating from a weaker place. Real authority waits until the room adjusts itself around it. And Harlem was adjusting. Corners settled into stillness, not tension control. The kind that comes from knowing where lines are drawn and trusting they won't be crossed without consequence. A police supervisor checked his watch too often. He made a call that went nowhere, then another. Orders stayed vague. Hold position, maintain presence. Words that sound strong until they're repeated. Holding position means nothing is moving. And nothing moving was Bumpy's advantage. Inside a back room, Bumpy listened while others talked. He didn't interrupt, didn't nod. He let the room speak itself empty. Someone suggested a meeting. Someone suggested a warning. Someone suggested making noise. Bumpy lifted a hand, not high, just enough. The room went quiet immediately. That was the difference. He didn't need agreement. He already had it. "They want us loud," he said calmly. His voice wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. "They want to show the neighborhood what pressure looks like." No one argued, because everyone could feel it. Bumpy stood, adjusted his jacket once, then sat back down. No rush, no show. Just enough movement to remind the room he was present. "We don't give them that," he continued. "We let them stand there until they understand who they're standing in front of." That was it. No plan drawn out, no threats issued, just posture. Outside, officers shifted. Radios crackled with updates that weren't updates at all. Still quiet. No incidents. Community cooperative. Cooperative. That word bothered them, because cooperation implies choice. The city wanted obedience. Harlem was offering restraint. A patrol car idled too long near a corner store. The owner stepped outside, slow and deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask permission. He locked his door. The message was clear: "You're not welcome inside." Across the street, another shop stayed open. Business continued. Life made its point. We decide how this looks. Power doesn't need to shout. It needs alignment. And alignment was happening without instruction. That's when City Hall felt it. Not as fear, but as loss of control. They had deployed force and received neutrality. That's worse. Neutrality denies the narrative. You can't claim victory over silence. Bumpy waited. He knew escalation was coming. It always does when authority feels ignored. Someone would push. Someone would try to provoke a response that could be framed, filed, justified. He wasn't worried, because when you understand the room better than the people trying to dominate it, time works for you. And time was leaning Harlem's way. The push came dressed as procedure. Late afternoon, broad daylight, clean streets, cameras close enough to notice, far enough to pretend they weren't there. A line of officers moved with intention this time, not aggressive, purposeful. They chose the corner carefully. A place people passed through. A place respect mattered. They stopped a man everyone knew. Not a lieutenant, not muscle. A messenger. Someone who carried words, not weapons. The request was polite, too polite. Mind stepping aside. A pause. A search that took too long. Hands where they didn't need to be. Questions that had already been answered. The kind of delay meant to say, "We can touch whoever we want." Harlem noticed. The street didn't explode. It tightened. This wasn't violence. It was humiliation. And humiliation is louder than a gunshot when it's done on purpose. People slowed their walk without stopping. Heads turned just enough. No one interfered. No one needed to. The moment was being recorded somewhere deeper than film. This was the city drawing a line, not against crime, against influence. Word reached Bumpy fast this time. Not rushed, not panicked, just accurate. "They made it public," someone said. Bumpy nodded once. That was the confirmation. He stood, smooth, unhurried. The room shifted with him, not because he demanded it, but because stillness follows certainty. "They want an answer," he said. No anger in it, no pride, just fact. Outside, the officers finished their display. Paperwork produced, names written down, everything legal, everything intentional. The man was released without charge. That was the insult. Not arrest, not force, dismissal. The message was clear. We can stop your people anytime, anywhere, and send them home like nothing happened. That's when Harlem held its breath, because this was the moment that decided things. Loud or quiet, blood or memory, reaction or response. Bumpy didn't hurry. He walked into the open where he could be seen, not surrounded, not guarded, just present. Conversation stopped without instruction. Doors stayed open. The street made room without stepping back. That's respect. He didn't look at the police first. He looked at the people. A glance that said, "I see it too." A promise without words. Then he turned. The captain met his eyes. They held. Not long, long enough. This wasn't a showdown. It was a measurement. Bumpy stepped close enough to speak without raising his voice. Close enough that whatever he said would belong only to the man standing in front of him. No crowd reaction. No dramatic pause. Just breath, then words, 2 of them, not yet spoken, and every badge on the block felt the shift before it happened. Bumpy didn't lean in. He didn't lower his voice for effect. He spoke like a man confirming something that was already decided. 2 words, soft enough that only the captain heard them, heavy enough that everyone felt them. The captain's jaw tightened, not in anger, in calculation. Because those words didn't threaten violence. They promised consequences. Not today, not loud, not immediate, later, quiet, permanent. That's what made them dangerous. The captain straightened, took half a step back without realizing he'd moved. He glanced down the block at the people who weren't staring, at the stores that hadn't closed, at the calm that refused to break. This wasn't a crowd waiting to riot. It was a community waiting to remember. Bumpy held his gaze another second, then looked away first. Dismissal. The captain gave an order into his radio that sounded routine. It wasn't. Units began to reposition. Cars rolled not out, but back. Space opened where pressure had been applied. No announcement. No victory speech. Just withdrawal disguised as adjustment. Bumpy stayed where he was until it finished. Then he nodded once to no one in particular and turned back the way he came. That was it. The city had made its point. So had he. And only one of those points would last. By evening, the street looked ordinary again. That was the lie. Police cars were gone, but the space they'd occupied still carried weight. People noticed it the way you notice a room after an argument, quiet but changed. Stores closed on time, not early. That mattered. Men gathered where they always did. Conversations resumed without bravado. No retelling. No chest beating. Harlem doesn't celebrate surviving disrespect. It files it away. That's how legacy is built. Bumpy didn't linger in public. He never needed to. His work was already finished the moment the city adjusted its posture. Power that lasts doesn't stay on display. What he'd done wasn't dramatic. That's why it worked. 2 words had reminded City Hall of something it preferred to forget. Authority borrowed from paper ends where loyalty begins. No arrests came later. No follow-ups. No next steps. Because escalation requires justification, and justification requires resistance. Harlem gave them none. Instead, something else spread. Quiet confirmation. The kind that settles into bones and stays there. He handled it, not with violence, with memory, with restraint. That's the difference between fear and respect. Years from now, people wouldn't remember the number of officers or the language of the order. They'd remember that the city tried to bend Harlem in daylight, and Harlem didn't move. They'd remember Bumpy Johnson standing without standing, speaking without speaking, dominating without touching a thing. That's legacy. Not the noise, not the blood. The calm that comes after the city learns its place.